All right, so hi, I'm Dela. I've spent the last 3.5 years working on the Call of Duty franchise. I've been working at a studio called Raven. They're owned by Activision Blizzard, which I didn't actually know at the time I was hired that they were Activision Blizzard, which just made me super stoked. I spent about half my time there working on a game called Warzone. My official job title is I'm a user experience technical designer, which means I do a lot of UI, I do a lot of interactions. That's primarily focused on how the player interacts with the front end, the menus, the interface, the guns. I did a lot of gun stuff. And so let's get started. So yeah, what else did I say? So I've been working in art or art adjacent jobs for about 24 years now. I've just turned 42, rock and roll. And I got started doing architectural illustration. My mom, my stepfather have an architectural illustration business. They used to do everything by hand. My stepdad went to art center, and they knew they wanted to move into computers. And I had just gotten my computer certifications. I was a programmer. I was already building apps and stuff. And so I got started there. And initially I was mostly a technical person who just worked adjacent to artists. Then I went on to work at Warner Brothers Online. I did a bunch of movie websites. Then I went to Yahoo. And then in my freelance era, I've done work for Google, Honda, Microsoft, Epson. Won a couple Site of the Day awards during that period. I got nominated for a Webby, which is pretty cool. If you've ever seen the Webby awards, they're really funny. Your acceptance speech is only allowed to be 5 words, and then people do really clever things with it. And then around 2010, I went and started, I transitioned into Unity development. I did a bunch of mobile games for iOS and Android. Because I'd had the 3D experience doing architecture 3D, which isn't quite the same as game 3D because game's low poly, but we'll get into that. I did mobile games for a while, and then mobile games and Unity development led me into doing stuff with virtual reality. I was trying real hard to get into the Oculus Meta Fellowship. I built some of my own VR things, and I also did VR work for other people. And that VR work got me a call one day from Raven Software, who invited me to come work on Call of Duty. And that was the first time I got to work on Xbox and PlayStation games. This was a lifelong dream of mine. To get to not just the video game industry, but to actually be at Activision Blizzard was something I wanted since I was a child. Warcraft 1 was my very first video game I had on PC. I played every video game they've ever released, and so it's something I really wanted for a long time. Funny story, when I got hired officially, they sent me a link to sign all of my contracts and stuff, and in their HR portal, it had a history of every time I'd ever applied, which was like 5 or 6 times with the word denied next to it, right? So I had a long history of trying to get this gig. And I say that to you because there's a lot of really talented people out there who have more experience than you. And so as you aspire, as you see all the careers I'm about to present to you, know that sometimes you work less exciting gigs. You know, like one of my first mobile games I made was Curious George. As a 10-year-old, I didn't say, oh, I want to grow up and make a Curious George game. But that game got me another game, which got me another game, which got me to where I am today, through that process, you know. A famous artist friend of mine, Joshua Davis, who's really incredible, he says, people will only hire you to do the work you've already done. And my personal experience is that is absolutely true. If you show up with an incredible portfolio of things they know they want, you got it. If you show up and say, well, I want to do this, I'm pretty good at it, here's some samples, but they know you're not there and you know you're not there, they probably aren't, unless it's like an internship or something, they're probably not going to hire you to train you, right? So we go through these things and you start to assess where you see your own talents, your own interests, where they align with these career paths in the game industry, also know that it's all about how much time you spend in the chair, how many pieces you make. Every time you make another piece, it's going to be better than the last one, and just that consistency. Force yourself to do the work. You know, give yourself even when you're out of school, give yourself every week you do a drawing, you do a painting, you do whatever, you know, because it's a long race, it's a long run to the top, right? And so next, and I should say, I absolutely love what I do. Every second through all of this, through my whole career, whether I was making little kid games or websites or, you know, whatever, I've always loved it. I'm deeply in love with my career, and like, even the projects that weren't my favorite projects, kind of speaking to what your professor said a little earlier, even the projects that weren't my favorite projects were still fun. I was still working with other creatives. I was still working in the tools I like to use, Photoshop, Unity, 3D Max, like, and these will be different for all of us, right? So it's been a very worthwhile run through this career life, you know? And I can't, of all the jobs I could have doing what I do, like, working in the game industry is absolutely the one I want, for what that's worth. So, kind of touched on that. We're gonna go into what each of these skills are, what they really mean, what the work really looks like, and what role they play in the overall production of a AAA or indie video game, right? Afterwards, this one will be a little bit longer than last time, Jason, because I've added some video and stuff of some of the more complex things so you guys get to see what's going on. But I will be here afterwards, whether that's during class time or post-class time. If anybody wants to talk to me one-on-one, don't be afraid. Okay, so first I'll just give you a quick overview, and at the end I'll show you a bunch of my actual work. I'll show you videos of things I've actually made in the game engine. So me personally, I do design work. Like I might design a new feature before it's finished. Somebody might say, hey, we should add this to the game. What would that look like? So I'll start with rough sketch, broad strokes, rough sketches. We call them wireframes in what I do specifically. And then at some point, my specific job as a UX technical designer is I have to take either my art or art another artist has created, and I have to prep it so that it will run in the game engine. You can't just drop a Photoshop file in. And there's a lot of very specific rules about how game engines work that require you to process all of your stuff in a very particular way. You might have some brilliant artists who use this, like, let's say in Photoshop, they're using blending options and like all kinds of crazy masks and all kinds of stuff. That stuff you can't just put that in the game. The game just wants flat PNGs, whatever special effects you're using, I have to figure out how to make them work as a flat. Often, because things are interactive, you need to also break them up into layers and think about like, okay, this button animates, how many layers does that require? How many images is that? So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. I do a little bit of programming, and I do bug fixes. So I've reorganized this around the first two things relate to your assignment. So concept artists. What are we really doing? The concept artist is usually one of the first people hired onto a new game IP, right? Because somebody wants to make a game. Maybe they have little demos and stuff, and now they're gonna go and try to get money for it, right? Whether that's they're pitching it internally in their own studio or they're pitching it to a publisher. And so once they know what they wanna make, they're gonna sit down with the concept artist and they're gonna they wanna sell how cool this game could be through these flat still images, right? And so the first process is exploring what does this world look like? What does it feel like? Is it dark? Is it scary? Is it light? Is it fun? The second part too is world building, which is like, think of like Lord of the Rings, right? Before they shot that movie, somebody sat down and painted all these environments long before they ever went into production on that film. What could this look like? What does the castle look like? Maybe they end up making it 3D. Maybe they go find an old castle somewhere that looks that way. But we're gonna start planning, like, where does this shoot take place? Are we doing it inside a studio building, or are we going out on location because we can find that stuff? And so, a lot of times budgeting around the film is initially triggered off of what this initial concept art looks like. And then once the game goes into full production, the concept art also becomes like a source of truth, right? When somebody makes a 3D model, somebody makes a character, does it look like the concept art? Is the 3D thing that we made selling the thing that we fell in love with when we saw the concept art? And so the concept art can often become almost like a dictionary of look and feel that the rest of the studio is going to reference throughout the production of the game. And also, like, a concept artist might also work directly with other, texture artists, 3D artists, UI designers to guide them if they feel like, oh, you're missing something about this. They might give them guidance. Frequently, concept artists can grow into becoming full creative directors in their career path. That's not uncommon, and we'll get to that at the very end. Oops. So we're gonna go through some famous concept artists who are working in the industry right now. This is Ken Fairclough. He works at BioWare. And all the things you see here are things that were probably made before game production started, right? So this is for Anthem. We can see that it's those characters, and like that building doesn't look exactly like it finally looks in the game, but it's pretty close. This is Ken Hu. This is an indie game called Roller Drum. This kind of speaks to some of the character things that Jason spoke about, right? How when we're designing the character, we might present them like this. These are flats, but a 3D artist could pull this into Maya or Max and use it as a guide to quickly, create splines and start drawing these shapes. How things would work. The reason I include this slide is I love, again, it's sort of a technical drawing, but also I like how it shows how the animation works with how the feet step, which is pretty cool. Exploration of characters, different outfits. Maybe your game has skins. What do those look like for each character? This is the same game, Grégoire Foy. He concepted all of the arenas where these roller battles take place. And again, kind of almost more of a technical drawing in some ways, but you also get a good sense of how the environment feels. They're defining some maybe these gates open and close. There's a little bit of gameplay sort of described here. So we're gonna come back to, I'm looping character designer and concept artist together because they both sort of work at the same time. They're both usually the first in on a project. So character designer, there's a couple big features to this. Personality, right? Like if you played a game like Overwatch as an example, that's a great, or like League of Legends, both those games convey a lot of personality in their character designs, right? They're not just, they're not just warriors, they're very specific. Oh, this guy is cursed, she's a goddess or whatever, right? And how do we communicate all that? This also ties in with skinning and things like that. We're gonna look at some slides here. And this whole deck will be available to you, so everyone can come back and look at it on their own time. So a character artist, like here, we're really exploring the personality of this character. They're fun, playful, they're interested in science, they do stuff, they're crafty maybe. There's a lot of personality that's conveyed in these images that an animator might take inspiration off of later. Again, like, what does the car cast of characters look like? How do they look next to each other? How do we sell that? Oh, this person's, the wimpy computer programmer like me, and this person's the big buff, baseball player guy or whatever. Because we're always trying to communicate without words whenever possible. A good rule of thumb is don't tell me, show me. Whether in any kind of storytelling, don't tell me, show me, I think is a really great mantra to keep with you. So here's our character undressed in various levels of space armor. This one's really beautiful. I like how they presented this really highly detailed face image, but then also giving these less detailed silhouettes. A lot is communicated here, and it's got a really great sense of style. This is, when you're working on your own portfolio, I think this is a really killer presentation right here, because there's lots of different levels of, yeah, I can make a quick sketch, but yes, I can also do this like Rembrandt style painting. This is Jinx from Arcane. This was the concept art that they did before they started developing the Netflix show Arcane. Of course, she was already a very, very, very well-defined character in League of Legends, so they had a lot to draw from. Her iconic striped pants, her blue hair. So another thing a character artist does that you'll see, especially, I'm gonna reference Overwatch again, or Valorant is another good example, is silhouettes, right? In the spirit of communicating visually as much as possible, right? A silhouette is important. So like in Overwatch, Reinhardt, he's a big guy in a giant suit of armor. He's got a giant shield. You can see him from really far away. He's a big dude. He's an imposing figure. So he's a tank. He's durable. He can take a lot of hits. And you didn't need to be told that with words when you see him. You see him, this big hulking guy in this huge set of armor. You know that this guy's it's gonna take a lot of bullets to take this guy down. On the other hand, you know, you've got like this skinny little guy with the hook here. That guy probably gonna take one shot, right? So threat and you know, menace can be communicated non-verbally through shape and silhouette, and that's always an important thing to consider. The character's not just about a face, it's about the presence. So here's a great example of Overwatch characters, right? Like Tracer here at the bottom row, the skinny little girl, like she's squishy. She's gonna, one hit, she's down, you know, Black Widow. But then you see all these other guys like Roadhog, Orisa, you know, so you get a good sense of who's fast, who's quick, who's nimble, who's big and slow. And so yeah, so that's another thing to really think about character design. This kind of lends itself into it. This was actually probably made more by a UI person likely, but it does tie into the silhouette concept of how well can I communicate, with how few shapes can I communicate which character this icon is for, you know? So that's another thing to think about if you're designing characters. It could be like a little extra bonus thing you add of like, how would you communicate them as an icon? You know, if you're picking something or you just see the icon on screen, would you know that that was your character? We're gonna go through a little bit of this. This guy is gonna show you his portfolio for the whole thing is available to you in the link that you'll get at the end. So I'll stop that there. I feel like those are some really great, that initial set of advice is really great stuff right there. So now let's move back into 3D modeling. Most video games today use 3D. And once we get past the, you know, character design stage, once we get past just painting them, now we're gonna need to make something that we can put in our game engine. There are games that do 2D animation. That's not where my particular expertise is based on the work I've done, so I'll be a bit more focused on 3D stuff. Plus you guys are probably getting great 2D animation stuff already through the curriculum you're in, so I won't really touch on 2D games so much. They basically work like cartoons. Most of the workflow is the same outside of the fact that most modern games are using 3D models. So, show of hands, has anybody done any 3D modeling in here yet? 1, 2, 3, 4, a little bit. Okay, yeah, so for the people who haven't done it, 3D models are kind of like paper mache, right? They're hollow in that sense. You know, you're making a shape, and the shape on the most fundamental level is made out of triangles. Here we can see that they're showing it as polygons. So each of these polygons is made of 2 triangles. Everything in 3D is triangles, right? So 3 vertices, boom, that's a triangle. And now we're gonna mold, we're gonna paper mache ourselves a character out of that. We'll start with some really simple ones. In a lot of video games, especially older ones, older 3D games, like think Star Fox or like 3D Mario or stuff like that, it started, the 3D game modeling process, it started off with how few triangles can I use to sell this character, to sell this shape, to sell this environment, right? Because the thing about a game engine is that it runs in real time. It's not a render, right? When you watch any big movie where they have all kinds of crazy computer graphics on top of the film that they shoot, they have buildings bigger than the room we're in right now, full of computers, like just racks and racks and racks of CPUs that take all that final 3D work that has been done and render it at super high quality, right? So the Final Fantasy movie, that was the first movie that was 100% CGI. They had 100,000 computers working for 2 years to render that movie. Of course, this was early 2000s. They have better computers now, but they also are doing a lot more with them too. So it's still kind of similar. They have giant, sometimes, you know, giant server farms that all they do is do renders. But the name of the game is, we want this thing to run at least 30 frames a second. Most modern games are trying to get 60 frames per second or higher. So that means 60 times a second we're re-updating what's on the screen, which means we have to go through every single model that's on screen from back to front and draw it, right? So the fewer triangles we use, the better. So that's like where some of the main, the new skill to learn. If you've already paint great, you're already a great artist, but you've never done 3D, the skill to learn in 3D is how do I do this with as few triangles as possible? And there's lots of tools to help you do it. It's pretty finely tuned thing now. So like here, this is an example of what we call LOD, which stands for level of detail. And the way we do this in game engines is a very common practice. So let's say there's 3 rhinoceroses in the scene. There's one way at the back of the room, there's one in the middle of the room, and there's one right in front of me, right? So the one that's right in front of me, we're gonna use the highest level of detail. We're gonna use this LOD right here, because I'm up close to it, and I'm so close to it, I can see all the nuance, and that's where I wanna spend my triangles, right? The rhino that's in the middle of the room, which is not so close to me, I'm gonna go to the next lower level of detail, because I'm not gonna be able to appreciate how finely smooth this surface is when it's that far away from me. And then for the rhinos that are really far away, I'm gonna go into really low level detail. If something's showing up on screen, just a tiny little guy, I don't need that many triangles to communicate its overall shape, so I'm gonna go to the lowest level of detail. This is a super common process. If you do 3D model at a game studio, you will probably be doing LODs. There are tools that do it for you, but my experience is that it's still good to know how to do it yourself, because sometimes you might need to go in and edit it on your own. Sometimes, the automated tools just don't do it quite right. They mess up something. So, this is a skill it's a skill within the skill, basically. Let's see what we got next. Okay, so here's another day in the life. We're gonna look at this guy. I'm gonna put it at double speed here. I'm sorry. There we go. So texture artists. A lot of times 3D modelers will do their own textures. So sometimes the two things are combined, but sometimes there are some, especially I'd say more in the 2000s era, it was not uncommon to also have a team of just texture people, and there still are just texture people. It just, these days, it seems like most people coming out of art school with heavy 3D backgrounds are already pretty good at making their own texture. So sometimes those two jobs are combined, and sometimes you have a guy who's just so good at textures that they're just really focused on that. So in this one, we can see the unwrap, right? And so imagining the 3D model as a paper mache, right? Somebody made a paper mache, they painted on it, right? And then imagine them slicing it with an X-Acto blade and then laying all out flat again, right? So we can see all the triangles that make up the shape sort of laid out flat. And the texture artist can then go in, paint just in the texture. And this is before, this is how they do it with out things like ZBrush. This is like the traditional way, like in the 90s and early 2000s, this is absolutely how everybody did it. And if you went to school for just 3D stuff, they would probably make you do it by hand for a while before they let you do it with all the cool tools. So we can see that with all the pieces laid out, the artist could come into Photoshop or whatever their art program is, they could paint on it, they could save it, and then they could refresh the 3D model, like in a 3D program. We actually have tools where you don't even need to run Maya. Like you can just load up a 3D model of a game character or something like that. You could open up the texture, and in our custom tools, you can just have the one model there where you can move it around, rotate it, zoom in, and then you could paint on your textures, and then you could just see them updated on the model. Let's see, what else we got? Here's another unwrap of something a little more photoreal. This is how it works for simpler objects, so like homes and stuff. Something we love to do in the game world is we love to use things more than once. So like I could have a whole city, a whole village of little houses that could use just this one texture, but they could just be applied to different 3D models that just follow the general rules of the shapes and stuff, right? Also, once you have something like this, we could also do a color overlay. So I could make 5 copies of that house, and then in the engine, I could just apply a tint to it and suddenly it looks like a whole new set of textures, even though it's not. There's another unwrap. Those hands are complicated, right? Here's the wireframe without no textures on it. And it looks like a painting, but that's actually a rendered model. You can kind of tell, you can see the polys right here, right? You can tell a little bit that it's a 3D model, but it looks like a cartoon, you know? So the textures can really do a lot to communicate the style of your world, your environment. Also, you might have noticed if you guys watch anime, a lot of animes now, when they have real complex things happen, they actually do it in 3D, and then they just paint the 3D models to look just like the anime does. You'll see that a lot with like spaceship flies by, with like scenes that are like on the freeway with lots of cars and stuff. They tend to mostly do it with inorganic things, like structures and stuff like that. Ghost in the Shell does it a lot. Here's some more real simple shapes. You can see how the coin, because of, there's a few other types of textures here. There's bump maps, and there's also like light maps and things like that. So this coin presents as if it's got this 3D bevel, right? But that's actually the model of it, right? So they use the high poly model to bake out a bump map, right here. And the bump map tells the renderer to draw it as if it's 3D, even though it's not. So we save on the polygons. And so just to reiterate, so what he was showing you here is like somebody set up all these materials, and then they went to a 3D scene that didn't have those materials, and they just applied them to all the 3D objects. And now all the behaviors of how they interact with light, that kind of thing, have all been applied to that scene, and look how well it sold that scene. All right, moving on. Rigging. So rigging is the black magic part of character animation. Back in the 90s, people would animate characters by hand, where they would go into a timeline and they would make little adjustments. They'd move the timeline forward, make little adjustments, move the timeline forward. Everything was done by hand, kind of like a claymation, you could think of it as. That's how 3D animation started originally, right? Everything was done by hand. But now we have motion capture, which we'll get into after this, but motion capture can't work without a rig, right? So the way it works is the rigger creates a skeleton, right? They create a skeleton and they set up all the joints and all the interactions between, maybe your guy only has 2 fingers, right? That's gonna need a custom rig for those 2 fingers to articulate in a natural way. So that guy's gonna sit down, he's gonna make a custom hand that only has 2 fingers. You might have somebody that has a really long neck, maybe like a giraffe character or something like that. You might have somebody with really long legs. There are character rigs that are off the shelf that are just standard human proportions and have all the standard human stuff. And that's totally a great place to start when you have your 3D model and you want to just set it up so it can move, so it can you can pose it. And so let's get into, it's also used heavily in facial animation. So we got our 3D artist made our T-pose model, our rigger made the rig, and then the rig is linked to the model. And there's a lot that goes into that. It's a very specialized field. Not a lot of people like to do it, not a lot of people are good at it, but some people really hyper specialize in this. And anyone who hyper specializes in rigging will definitely always be involved in animation. Like doing, it's one thing to like be a 3D artist working on a game, but if you aspire to do the cutscenes, you wanna be a part of animating cutscenes, then you're probably gonna have to you're definitely gonna touch other people's rigs. But it would behoove you, if that was your interest, to also get good at rigging yourself. Here's a really complex one. We can see this character's interesting. He's got 3 fingers. He's got his horns, right? You might have he's got these tassels. You know, I don't know, this little typer thing, whatever this is. It clearly animates because he's created a skeleton rig to also show how the parts of his garment that move back here too, how those things will interact, right? And so somebody set up this rig and then they married it to this model, right? This model was in a T-pose, but once it got connected to the rig, now you can see that's perfectly matching what the skeleton's doing. Some more examples where you can see, these are human ones. You know those little like dummies that if you were like trying to get good at character drawing, there's like, you can pose them. It's kind of like that, right? Here's Sully. He's got long proportions, got really long arms, really short legs, so this was a custom made.
Oh, I love this guy.
Okay, so we talked about how in the early days of game development, everything was modeled by hand. You would go in, you would pose your character, you'd move it forward a frame, you'd pose it again, you move it forward a frame, very much like stop motion, and then you could play the whole thing back, and now you've got your animation. How we do it these days is it's almost always motion capture, unless it's a very, maybe like a slime or, like something real goofy, it's a rock that talks or something. Some of those things might be animated by hand, but anything that's a character, especially human beings, they're almost always gonna be motion captured. We have an entire motion capture studio right in. We have actors come in, act out scenes that are in the game, and all their everything that their body does and their face is all recorded. And we'll look at some of the setups for it. It's a bit more technical. Sometimes there are people who only do motion capture. Usually they still were 3D artists first. They definitely probably know something about rigging. They might have been a rigger too, because rigging and motion capture are tightly intertwined. The motion capture recording gets applied to the rig, right? So if you don't have a rigged model, you can't do anything with the motion capture data. Can also be some cleanup. Sometimes in the process of capturing the person's actions, you might have to go in and smooth out some stuff. That's pretty normal. I know on the Call of Duty franchise, they have a really big motion capture studio down in Los Angeles where they did this one animation where it was a bunch of Navy SEALs like on a boat in the ocean, and they actually built an entire rig to simulate the raft in choppy water, and they motion captured the raft and the actors in it. So all the actors are in the boat, and there's a big rig that's bouncing them around. So they'll go to great lengths they'll motion capture somebody maybe being dropped in from a helicopter or what have you. They'll go to great lengths to motion capture everything they possibly can. So it's a huge part of the workflow that every game we do has it. So here we can see some guys in some suits. The cameras in front of their faces are meant to capture facial animations. The little tags around the body are meant to track key parts of where the bones are at any given moment of an action. This is what our rigs look like with the funny little mouse-shaped points on them. They look really, it's funny when you see all these guys come into the lunchroom after a session and they're all dressed up like this. And also like the weapons are being motion captured. You can see there's points on this lady's spear, and on this guy's sword. As many data points as we can get, we're going to try to get. So here's Taika Waititi in a mocap suit. He plays the big rock guy in Thor Ragnarok. I don't know if you guys seen that. So he's doing all the scenes with Chris Hemsworth, but he's in this rig, and you can see how there's a point. He's got the little head behind him because that's how tall his character really is, right? So they're tracking like, oh, he's a real tall guy. So even though Taika Waititi isn't that tall, they're using this little post thing to sort of capture that. This is a Rococo suit, which is like, I think they're about $2,000, and it's like more of a quick and dirty way. You don't need all the cameras and stuff, and that's another great system for motion capture. This is Benedict Cumberbatch. That's how you say his name. He's doing the physical performance for Smaug in The Hobbit, right? So that's how that animation came out so great. This guy was really crawling on the ground and acting like a dragon. Great performance on that one. This is real quick. We'll skip it. Okay, so here's another tool that's tied into 3D modeling. Most people who do this already have extensive backgrounds in 3D and can make all kinds of awesome stuff all by themselves. But sometimes we want a famous building in the game. We want to go to a famous location. We want to go to a famous statue. And also maybe we want things that are set really high detail, and we don't want to have our, like take a game like Warzone. There's something like a million 3D, like literally, not an exaggeration. There's like a million 3D models in Warzone, and we don't want to make it all by hand. Where we don't have to, where we can, number one, where we can reuse things, but number two, if we can just go out to a location, right? And like, let's say there's gonna be a battle that takes place at a famous spot in Europe where World War II happened, right? We could just go out with drones and we could get a 3D photogrammetry setup of the environment, and then we can touch it up and do stuff on top of it, but maybe we don't have to make the whole thing from scratch. So the studios will send out whole teams to locations and they'll get stuff like this. We also use this for famous characters. Like a lot of our characters are played by actors, and we'll just have the actor come in and we'll get a 3D model of them. And then even if they don't come in and do their own motion capture, because sometimes they don't, especially if they're just primarily a voice actor. So we'll have people come in, or like, let's say like we had like Rambo, we did like Bruce Willis, we've done like some characters from movies and stuff. So we'll have somebody come in and we'll do this hyper real photo shoot where we get all the details of their face and their body and their shape, and it gets turned into a 3D model from that. So you can see here too, she's on this platform that rotates. So she's gonna hold this one pose. The platform's gonna rotate and she's gonna spin around, and we're gonna get her from every angle from all these different cameras. So this 3D model came from a body scan and a setup like this. This is a place in Rome that they did aerial 3D photogrammetry, where basically they'll have drones that fly up and then back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Get the whole thing, and they'll get it from multiple angles. They'll get it from above, they'll get it from the sides, and then they're able to generate this 3D geometry with all the textures and everything built in. It'll still have to get cleaned up because it needs to run in a game engine, so this is not the only step, but it's a nice place to start, especially if your game's taking place in some sort of historical environment. Here we can see a map of each camera position, right? So each of these is a point where a camera took a photograph, right? And then the whole thing gets run through a software system that then builds it into the 3D model with all the textures and everything. Famous statues. This is a real quick one. So from that one exposure, that's 3D photogrammetry. We have a specialized team that just does that stuff. Oops. All right, so now this is getting closer to what I do. I am a UX technical designer, so I do, and we're going to get into a bunch of, I have a bunch of behind the scenes stuff to show you. So this is a feature I was assigned to do. You can see this is the whole deck of all the screens that make up this feature. And so what we're talking about is you just played a match in Warzone, and well, I should take a step back. So this is a wireframe, right? What we're doing is we're talking about not how the screen is going to look aesthetically. We're talking about how the screen is going to work. What are the features of the screen, right? Like, I know that I want to tell you what rank you placed in the match. I want to show you the other people on your team, their names, their icons, their little, doohickeys that they have on their account. How well did each person do, their scores, their kills, their damage, right? And what we were trying to decide is, do we want to add a system, which we did end up adding, do we want to add a system that allows you to choose to take some of your teammates, or all of your teammates potentially, into the next game. Sometimes you join a game with all your friends, you know you're going to play a bunch of matches together, but sometimes you're just playing with randoms, and man, this guy was great. I want to play another match. We won, or whatever. He was just fun to play with, or he was a good teammate. And so this screen was meant to help you assess how good, did that guy really get all those kills? Oh no, he didn't. It was that guy who got the kills. Oh, I misread that while the match was going. So here, we're giving you the option to decide if you want to play a game with team. We can see that this person I haven't decided. This person I said yes. This person I said no. And so just how the screen might work. Show your loot, your XP, all that stuff. Because we want to account for all the things that the screen is going to do, all the things we're going to communicate before we get into the nitty-gritty of the aesthetics, right? Here's another take on it that reorganizes a lot of the information. How are you progressing through your battle pass? Have you unlocked features in your weapons? How are you doing your daily challenges? So this is a different take on the screen where we've prioritized the information a little bit differently. This also, so I did a lot of work in the gun system for a long time on Warzone. So after we get through the wireframing stage, we'll do mock-ups like these. Like this looks like it's from inside the game, but it's not. This was straight out of Photoshop. And we have a library of, anytime we make something that ends up in the game, it goes into a library. We have a whole design library of all the stuff that we're using. So a lot of times you're able to pull elements that have already been finalized from other past design work you've done, or past design work other people have done, and sort of assemble them in new ways to sort of communicate how we might change a screen before we get programmers involved, before we get all the things. This is another one. This is how you're doing on unlocking certain things. Here we can see that this is part of our design language library, right? So these are elements that we know we're going to use in lots of places. You might see this on a pause screen, you might see it in the game, you might see it in the menus. These things might pop up as little elements on screen.